Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you all doing? You are tuning in to another live episode of The Left Lens. As you can see, I'm joined by a very special guest. It is Mr. Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst for over 25 years, longtime peace activist, whistleblower, and someone I've been following for quite some time. Ray, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing fine, Danny.
Great, great. Before we get started, just a few announcements. Be sure to drop a like on this stream. That's how you get more folks coming in so that they hear Ray's important analysis. Also, be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit that notifications bell, and of course, go to all the links in the description to support this channel and support this work. Well, let's get started, Ray. So let's just begin going from maybe the general to the particular. So I know you have been following developments with regard to Ukraine for quite some time. I want to get your perspective since you have been in, so to speak, the belly of the beast. And you have been following the Ukraine situation since before 2022 of February. You've been following it since the coup, since the Maidan coup, since the U.S. backed that regime change operation. What do you think is essential for people to know to pierce through the propaganda? Because right now it seems like we are awash in it. We hear so many things coming from the corporate media, from spring offensive for Ukraine, that the United States needs to keep giving weapons. They keep pledging weapons. We have Germany, in this situation where it seems to be defending at every step everything that the United States does. The EU is going along with everything the United States has planned for Ukraine. What do you think is essential for people to know in this situation, given that all we've heard is this is an unprovoked invasion from Putin and Russia? And now we're 1 year on, more than 1 year on, and it feels like there really is no off ramp in sight at this moment, no matter how much private whispers French leaders, German leaders are saying in terms of the prospects being pretty grim.
It is grim. Background, what people don't know. Well, you start with the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, some people haven't heard about that. Some people think Russia is out to take over, if not the rest of the world, at least Western Europe. Zelensky 2 days ago said, if we fail, Russia will be into the Baltics, into Poland, and then you Americans will have to send your troops into the fight. And they're going to fight and they're going to get killed. As sorry as that is, they're going to get killed. Huh? There is not a scintilla of evidence that the new Russia had any idea of taking over the. Have you been in the Baltic? I've been in the Baltic. I don't know.
No,
Russia would want to
not
take over
yet.
the Baltics. Why would Russia want to take over Poland? I don't know about Poland. So, there's something that I'd like to. I threw it on the floor because I didn't think we'd be able to use it, but here's a little telling snippet from Fox News Digital. All right. Here it is. I did a little tweet on it. Mike Rogers, head of the House Armed Services Committee, said that the U.S. should accelerate planning on deterring Russia after the communist nation pull out of the New START nuclear treaty. Wait a second. After the communists, hello, hey, Fox News Digital, got news for you. Putin is actually, he's just sort of said, look, that was then, this is new, and it is new. So what's new? After the Soviet Union fell apart, or actually, while it was in the process of dissolving, President George H.W. Bush, who I'm not ashamed to say is a friend of mine. Okay, I worked for him when he was head of the CIA. I used to brief him every other morning when he was vice president. Okay, we stayed in touch after he left Washington. He had this idea that since the Soviet Union imploded, there could be a Europe free and whole from Lisbon to Vladivostok, okay, in the Far East. It's a good vision. And when the Berlin Wall did fall, he called up Gorbachev and he said, Mikhail, I'm really sorry about your problems here. Just be assured I'm not going to take advantage of them, okay? We are not going to, Bush's words, dance on the Berlin Wall or what's left of it. But we need to get together quickly because Central Europe is kind of falling apart. How soon could you meet me? 3 weeks? Okay, 3 weeks. Let's meet in Malta, which they did. Early December, first week of December, 1989. Okay? Bush. Mikhail, I just want to reassure you, we're not going to take advantage of your troubles, but we have to figure out what to do. I want to send my Secretary of State, James Baker, to Moscow real quick so we can figure out this whole thing. How soon can you receive him? Early February? Okay. Baker, real smart Texas lawyer, who is Secretary of State, goes to Moscow. And he says, now, Mr. Gorbachev, President Bush has asked me to express his sympathy for your problems. This is what we'd like to work out so there'd be no more trouble in Central Europe. I would like to see a reunited Germany. Now, at the time when McGovern heard about a reunited Germany, my reaction was, I don't want a reunited Germany. I was alive for all of World War II. Maybe I saw too many movies after the war. But I knew that NATO itself was established to keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out, and to keep Germany down, divided. It scared me, reunified Germany. Now, I'm an American. I was alive, very small, of course, during World War II. And I know that some of our neighborhood had young people killed, some old people killed. 440,000 troops killed in World War II. How many did Russia have? After all, Gorbachev, now he's a Russian, right, that Jim Baker is talking to. Would you believe 26 million with an M plus? A little disparity there. Okay, so my point is simply this. I described my reaction. Can you imagine the reaction of Gorbachev and Shevardnadze, his foreign minister, when they were faced with this notion, well, they want to reunify Germany? My God, you know? So, long story short, what Gorbachev says is, well, that's a pretty bitter quid. What's the quo? You know, what's the quo here? And that's when Jimmy Baker. Now, I don't get, well, it's in documents, okay? It's in the archives, what happened next. But I prefer to relay to you all what Ambassador Jack Matlock, who happens to be a good friend of mine, he was there, right? He told me how it went. He says, Jim Baker says, well, now, smart lawyer from Texas. Well, now, how would it be? Yeah, how'd this be? Suppose we promise, cross our heart, hope to die, we would move NATO 1 inch east of the common German border. How would that be? Well, suffice it to say, Gorbachev, Shevardnadze, they slept on it that night. They needed economic aid. They needed all kinds of help from the United States. They presumed goodwill on the part of President George H.W. Bush. And so they said, okay. Now, was that agreement written down? As most people know, no, it wasn't. Okay. Now, I had an opportunity to ask one of Gorbachev's chief advisors at the time. His name is Kuvaldin, Viktor Borisovich. It was an informal thing in Moscow. It was after a conference, and I said, Mr. Kuvaldin, why didn't you get that written down? And he looked at me and said, well, I'll give you the two real enough reasons. One is that we didn't have German buy-in just yet. I mean, hello, we're talking about Germany, right? And number two, the Warsaw Pact still existed. So a little premature to be redrawing things, or lines. But then he looked me straight in the eye, Danny, and he said, Mr. McGovern, the real reason is we trusted you. Now, did Jimmy Baker forget to get it written down? My father's a lawyer, not from Texas. He said, how many times did he talk? Ray, get it in writing, for God's sake. So the little trickery there, suffice it to say that here we fast forward to, let's say we go all the way forward to 2008 now. And NATO has doubled and more in size. It was 12, now it's sort of like 28, 29. And they're all more than one inch east of the East German border. So 2008, what happens? We have this ambassador in Moscow, pretty knowledgeable guy, been around. His name is William Burns. He's now head of the CIA. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in those days, he stood up to Cheney and Condoleezza Rice, for whom he was working as ambassador to Russia. And the other guy was Bush, Junior Bush, okay? What happened? On the 1st of February, 2008, Bill Burns got a call from the foreign ministry in Moscow. Mr. Lavrov would like to see you like right away. Lavrov had just become foreign minister. He's still foreign minister, as most of you know. Lavrov greeted Mr. Burns and said, Mr. Burns, do you know what "niet" means? Bill said, oh, well, yeah. "Niet" means "niet." If you allow Ukraine, Georgia into NATO, there will be civil war in Ukraine. We will have to figure out whether we need to intervene to protect our border. As you know, Mr. Burns, we have a long border with Ukraine. We don't want to do that. For God's sake, "niet" means "niet." Now, what does Bill Burns do? He writes a cable back from Moscow. And to his credit, he tells it straight. The title of the cable is "Niet" means "niet." Russia's red line on Ukraine entrance into NATO. He goes even farther. In his ambassador comment, he says, Russia has strategic interests that it believes to be endangered. And, Russia's understandably, he's got a right to have strategic interests. That was the Bill Burns as ambassador working under Condoleezza Rice of all places. So he said all that. That was February 1, 2008. 3 months later, 2 months later, April 1, 2008, NATO summit in Bucharest, Romania. They discuss entry of Ukraine, Georgia into NATO, and the final declaration on the 3rd of April 2008 says Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO, period. Quote. Oh, wow. So that's how Bush and Cheney, who were about to ride off into the western sunset, and Condoleezza Rice, the functionary, that's how they reacted to Russia's concerns. That's 2008. Let's fast forward now to 2014. Well, let's do 2013 first because it relates to all this. In 2013, there was a false flag sarin nerve gas attack in Iraq, in Syria. Okay. Now, immediately, our Secretary of State, John Kerry, got up and said it was Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad. But he said it 25 times in one speech. Guess what? It wasn't. It was our own guys. It was the people he knew. We knew where the precursors came from through Turkey and all that stuff. So it was a lie. Kerry couldn't even get the intelligence community to sign on to that lie. But it was a casus belli. And all the neocons says, now we not only have to subvert Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, but now we can have an open war. We can shoot all those wonderful tomahawks off those naval ships and in the Med. It's going to be great, okay? Except Obama was smart enough to say, do I really want to get another war? I want to start another war. And all his advisors said, Obama, Barack, you got to do it. It's a red line we set. Chemical attack. Now it is a chemical attack. You got to do war. By chance, he was appointed to go up to a G20, G7, whatever it was, meeting in St. Petersburg, Russia. So Vladimir Putin meets him. This is the first week of September 2013. And he says, Mr. President, I got good news for you. What's that? We have just persuaded the Syrians to destroy all their chemical weapons under UN supervision on a ship especially fitted out for such destruction. And the Syrian foreign minister will be announcing that tomorrow. What do you think? And Obama says, really? John Kerry didn't tell me anything about that. You sure? He says, yeah, watch. So that's what happens. In other words, Mr. Putin pulls Mr. Obama's chestnuts out of the fire. He doesn't have to start the war. Wow. Now, are all his advisors saying you've got to do this war? Yes. How do I know that? Because Obama later said so. He talked to his unofficial biographer, Jeffrey Goldberg, of all people, and he said, I really went against what Obama called the Washington playbook. I didn't want to do a war, and I'm very proud that I stood up to that pressure. Okay, so what am I saying here? I'm saying that this was the halcyon day of U.S.-Russian relations. Early September 2013. Putin wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. Look it up. The 12th of September 2013. I was reliably informed at the time that he penned the last paragraph himself. In other words, it wasn't done by the foreign ministry. At least that last paragraph wasn't. Here's what it said. I'll shorten it a little bit for you. My working and personal relationship with President Obama is marked by growing trust. I appreciate this. I carefully studied his address to the nation on Tuesday, and I have to say that I would rather disagree with the case he made for American exceptionalism. It is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation. There are big countries and small countries, rich and poor, those with long democratic traditions, and those still finding their way to democracy. We're all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. Whoa! So it looked like there was growing trust. My God, how are we going to justify major military expenditures against an enemy that talks about growing trust? Well, it just took them 6 months, these neocons, 6 months to do the coup d'etat in Kiev, replacing a relatively pro-Russian government, duly elected and, official government, getting rid of them and putting in the coup people. And we know that this was the most blatant coup in history because it was advertised 2.5 weeks before, not advertised, but revealed. And they intercepted the conversation between Victoria Nuland, who was then Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, and Jeffrey Pyatt in Kiev. He was our ambassador. When people say, well, how do you know that was real? That people can falsify those conversations. I say, well, because Victoria Nuland apologized for it. Apologized for it? For the coup? No, she didn't apologize for the coup. She apologized for saying, when Pyatt said, the EU may have some problems with our orchestrating this coup d'etat. And she said, F the EU, with the other 3 letters of FR, right? So she apologized for that. If anyone had any doubts about the authenticity of that intercepted conversation, it was Nuland. We did the coup. We led the coup. And that's what started the big, most recent Ukraine crisis. What happened? Well, the coup leaders that we put in said, let's join NATO. Let's ban Russian as an official language. Now, about 35-40% of Ukrainians spoke Russian, mostly as their native language. It was always an official language. No more. And then there were all kinds of things going on, like in Odessa, and people driving down in buses to seize Crimea. Now, Crimea has a naval base that the Soviets and then later the Russians rented for like 50 years from Ukraine. This is their only all-weather, all-year-long naval base. Sevastopol is the name of it. It's got airfields nearby. It's a main military center, okay? So the Russians were hell-bent and determined that would not become part of NATO. And so what did they do? Well, on the 23rd of February, the day after the coup, Vladimir Putin came back from Sochi, where he finished up the Winter Olympics, and they got around the table and they said, well, now what are we going to do? Well, now Crimea used to be part of Russia. What happened? I don't know. Oh, yeah. Khrushchev, when he took the place of Stalin way back in 1953, okay? The next year, he was born and bred right near Ukraine, and he had a lot of good friends there. He thought, well, maybe it will enhance my political position if I gave Crimea to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine? Well, Ukraine was just part of the Soviet Union, right? So it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. But then when the Soviet Union fell apart, it mattered, okay? So Gorbachev says, well, how did Khrushchev do that? Well, he took a little piece of paper and he said, this is an ukaz. Crimea be part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Should I do it that way? I don't think so, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Why don't we have a plebiscite so we can show the world what the Crimeans would prefer? So they did that. The Crimeans, surprise, surprise, voted overwhelmingly to join the Russian Republic. And so they did. Now, that leads to the next big issue because after they had been annexed by Russia, it was a month later, the 17th of April. Putin got up, was celebrating the annexation of Crimea, and he said something very significant, which appears to have escaped everyone, including our policymakers. He said, in annexing Crimea, we were motivated by their desire to make Ukraine part of Nato. But even more important was the notion that they would put offensive strike missile emplacements in Ukraine, endangering Moscow with 5 to 7 to 10 minutes launch to target warning. Now, later, Putin spelled out the minutes and stuff, but he said even then, so on the 17th of April, 2014, he's already saying, look, we don't want them as members of NATO, but even more important was the notion that they would put these capsules in Ukraine that could endanger our ICBM fleet, our Moscow, and everything, okay? So, wow. Was that real? Well, there are capsules now in Romania and in Poland. They are described as anti-ballistic missiles capsules. The only problem is that they're in the wrong place. They can't down any Russian ballistic missiles. So they were explained as, it's defense against Iran, or maybe North Korea. No, North Korea. Oh, no, Iran. But just really transparently disingenuous. So just to kind of finish up this, what Vladimir Putin did was to say, look, right before Christmas 2021, he appeared before his naval admirals, his army generals, this defense minister, the whole schmear, on the 21st of December. And he said, look, the problem is that if these capsules are used for Tomahawk, Russian doesn't have one of those letters, so they're Tomahawk missiles. I have 7 to 10 minutes warning time. If they're hypersonic, which the Americans will eventually get hypersonic missiles, they'll figure it out. And then it's 5 minutes. I don't want to have just 5 minutes or even 7 to 10 minutes. Whoa. He didn't say, I don't want to blow up the rest of the world in some doubt as to whether these missiles are going to obliterate me or my ICBM force. But that's the sense of the whole thing. Now, the next paragraph was really interesting. And if you follow what Russian leaders say and the media and so forth, you can learn stuff, okay? It's what I used to do for 27 years, okay? The next thing he says, now, that's the reason we need to get a signed agreement. We can't go back to, not 1 inch east of East Europe.
Right.
We have to get something on paper. Paper.
No handshake, right? Not just a
handshake. Right. So then, that's all fact. That's all happened. Okay. Now, here's a little bit insight from me. I looked at the faces on those admirals and generals, and I thought I saw them saying, huh? Wasn't the ABM treaty on paper? Wasn't the treaty that demolished the whole class of intermediate nuclear missiles, the INF treaty, wasn't that on paper? Vladimir Vladimirovich, paper doesn't seem to mean much. What happens? 9 days later, so that's the 21st of December, 2021. On the 30th of December, the White House gets a call from the Kremlin. Mr. Putin would like to talk to Mr. Biden like right now? Flummoxed. The answer was, look, our negotiators are getting in touch here. They're going to start negotiations on these problems in Geneva on the 9th and 10th of January. So less than 2 weeks. Why does he have to talk to him now? Please, Mr. Putin would like to talk to Mr. Biden now. So to his credit, Biden accepts the call. And the readout from that call was Mr. Joseph Biden said that Washington has no intention of emplacing offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, period, end quote. Whoa, a big deal. Ushakov, one of Putin's main advisors on this, was waxing eloquent the next day. New Year's Eve was a big deal in Russia, okay? The negotiations in Geneva are off to a great start, except, and this is my interpretation, okay? They woke Joe Biden up the next morning and said, Blinken and Sullivan, Mr. President, you didn't really promise that. You didn't say we did it. Well, yeah. Well, forget about it. Forget about it. And so, long story short, the U.S. forgot about it. Okay. Now, that's the immediate problem on the ground. Membership in NATO, yeah, well, that doesn't matter so much as these emplacements. And I just finished this little segment by saying, you know, people say, well, how would you feel if the Chinese or the Russians went up into Canada and put those kind of missiles on our border? Well, you don't have to do a hypothetical, guys. This all happened before. Now, most people are too young to remember. But I was an Army intelligence infantry officer at Fort Benning during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember it quite well, thank you very much. What happened? Khrushchev thought, well, hey, here's a good idea. Why don't we put offensive strike missiles in Cuba, 90 miles off the United States, within range of Washington, Omaha, Nebraska, where the Strategic Air Command was. Hey, maybe we can sneak them in before they notice. And what happened? They did. It's a big intelligence failure until we finally took YouTube pictures of what was there. We didn't know it at the time. And President Kennedy asked us, CIA, I wasn't yet in the CIA. He said, well, are these missiles, are they armed? Do they have nuclear weapons on them? And the CIA said, we don't think so. And Kennedy said, huh? That's the best you can do? These days, the intelligence community says, we assess this and that. We assess that there were no nuclear tips on those missiles. Well, if they assessed that, or if they told Kennedy, as they did, we don't think so, they were dead wrong. We learned 30 years later, those things were on the missiles and they were armed. So what did Kennedy do? He said, look, this is an existential threat. I asked people who were really versed in this back in the day, and I said, well, how many minutes would it take those missiles to reach Washington or Omaha, Nebraska? And they said, minutes, Ray, minutes. I said, how many minutes? Minutes. So I couldn't tie them down, but I imagine it was 5 to 7 minutes or 5 minutes. These things go pretty fast, okay? So all I'm saying is Kennedy reacted in the appropriate way. He said, this is an existential threat to the United States of America. And what did he do? He did illegal things. Blockades, he called them a quarantine of Cuba. Well, it's a blockade. It's against international law. Some of my colleagues were down in Key West ready to spring into Cuba to invade. That's against international law. It's threatening nuclear conflict. That's discouraged by the UN. So Kennedy saw the stakes for what they were with respect to the United States, and he reacted accordingly. Now, the wonder is, the surprise is, I can't understand. Nobody accused President Kennedy of being unprovoked. For God's sake, he was provoked as provoked can be. So my point is, you could talk about whether the Russian invasion of Ukraine was legal or not. And believe it or not, there are differing opinions on that. Richard Falk, premier professor at Princeton, has his own opinion on that. It's not cut and dried, but let the lawyers argue about that. Was it provoked? Of course, it was provoked. So every time you hear people say unprovoked, that's a bull-faced lie. We can prove it, and it's very, very analogous to the threat that John Kennedy faced when Khrushchev put those missiles in Cuba.
Yeah, well, all of that was a very critical history. Thanks, Ray. I wanted to follow up on this with your testimony at the United Nations Security Council. I listened to it, and I know you were invited along with Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, also a friend of the show, to give your take on the deliberations of Russia's resolution for an independent investigation. Only China, I believe, at the UNSC has supported such a call for an independent investigation. I want to get your take on, I know Seymour Hersh personally. His article released early last month has really caused a firestorm, rightfully so, revealing through pretty meticulous analysis and investigation that the U.S., surprise, surprise, was behind the Nord Stream attack. Now, what is your take on all of this? And especially given we were talking a little bit before the show about Germany, and Germany is not calling for an independent investigation by the United Nations. Germany has, since the beginning of this incident, this happened all the way back in September of 2022. Ever since this happened, and Germany is the most effective player, arguably, in this terrorist attack, they've been going along with the U.S. line, which has been, the United States has been, well, what Seymour Hersh said is absolutely not credible, and we'll do investigations, but we'll never tell you what exactly comes about from those investigations. Could you talk about your view on the Nord Stream attack? What's its significance? And maybe you could just give viewers a little bit of what you had hoped to get across at the United Nations.
Sure. Well, let me address the German aspect first, because there's a weird kind of coincidence. What is it? It's the 3rd of March today, almost exactly 90 years ago. Now, I wasn't alive yet. I was alive for all of World War II, but I wasn't alive in 1933 when, on February 27th, someone burned down the German parliament. I was blamed on communists. A lot of people think it was a false flag attack. The important thing is that the German people and German politicians reacted with what one observer on the scene called sheepish submissiveness. The Nazis only had 44% of the people in parliament. The Democrats, Social Democrats, had a lot of power, and so did the Centrum, the Catholic Party. So what happened? Well, they caved. The Nazis exploited it. They passed all kinds of legislation of the kind we passed after 9/11, restrictive legislation, and the Democrats caved, and the Centrum Party caved, and you know the rest of the story. 90 years ago. Now, more recently, 78 years or so ago, at the end of World War II, The Germans realized they had to pay a price for what had happened. They acknowledged some responsibility for that. And so they acted basically like children, adolescents, and always did what Uncle Sam, what the United States told it to do. Even when things worked out that the US wanted something that was detrimental to Germany. So here we come up to a case where the German economy prospered mostly since 2011 because of the availability of really cheap Russian gas coming through a pipe called Nord Stream 1 under the Baltic and into Germany. They were able to sell a lot of the extra gas to the rest of Western and Eastern Europe. So what am I saying here? Well, it was a sine qua non for the German economy, and also for people in Germany who didn't want to freeze this winter. It was expected to be a more frigid winter than actually eventuated. But what happened was the U.S. was dead set against this pipeline. That they said so. They worked against it. And when it was blown up, they bragged about the fact that it was blown up. And they said, oh, this is a real opportunity to sell U.S. liquefied natural gas. Whoa. Well, so who was suspected of blowing up this pipeline? Well, any objective observer would have said, well, maybe the U.S. did it. Could the U.S. have done something like that? Now, it's really hard to believe that the U.S. would do that. I know the CIA well enough to know that even the most roguish rogues in the CIA would not try anything like this without express presidential approval. But the question became, who else? Who else has the capability, the incentive? Who else could have blown up this thing? Well, now we know, because Cy Hirsch, to his great credit, the best investigative reporter ever in this country, in my view, Pulitzer Prize winner for some of his revelations on Vide and other places, a 5-time Polk Award winner, that's right under the Pulitzer. So what's his shtick? People know that if it comes to Cy Hirsch, he won't reveal his source. No source has been blown by Cy Hirsch, despite the incredible investigative reporting he has done and been rewarded for. So what seems to have happened, and Cy has not told me anything that he hasn't told everybody else, is that somebody who was involved in this cockamamie scheme says to himself, well, wait a second, this is, I'll look it up. Is this an act of war? Oh, yeah, looks like it. Is it a war crime? Well, it looks like it might be. God, am I going to sit around and just keep my mouth shut like a submissive German? I don't think so. Where can I go? Who best to go to than, who better to go to than Cy Hirsch? We all, intelligence officers in the Army, as I was first, take a solemn oath. It's the only oath, really, that we take through our whole lives. And it's not to the president, it's not to the Congress. It's to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That may sound corny to folks today, but there are some of us that took that seriously. 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of such people were involved in the planning or knew about the planning for this, went to Cy and gave him chapter and verse in gory detail. So here it's out there on the 8th of February. Has it been in the New York Times? No. The Russians said, well, we can't really let this go by. We should have a a Security Council discussion and, if possible, an investigation of this, And so they invited Jeffrey Sachs, professor at Columbia University, and myself to give a little briefing before the discussion. And one of the things that Jeffrey Sachs is a very effective guy, and he has my great admiration. He doesn't need to do this stuff, but he's interested, as I am, as most of us intelligence officers who swore to uphold the Constitution are. He says, look, when we talk about investigations of who blew up the pipeline, there already has been one. Yeah, just a couple days after, when the dust cleared or the whatever vapor cleared, the Swedes, who know every square inch of the bottom of that Baltic Sea in that area, went down and they did their investigation. And when they came up to the top, people said, "What'd you find?" And the Swedes said, "We can't tell you. It's a secret. We can't tell Swedish citizens. We're not going to tell anybody. It would endanger national security." So what happens? On the day that we convened, it was the 21st of February, a paper had been circulated to all the Security Council members. And the paper was signed by the Danes, the Swedes, and the Germans. And they said, "Don't worry about it. We got it covered. We're going to do a thorough and complete investigation. We don't need the Security Council to get involved here. Please just trust us." The Swedes as well, So everybody quoted from that thing, that was, of course, the deal. You say, no, you're going to have to use security. But the Russians said, no, look, if the UN Security Council is worth its salt, this is an act of war. We need to investigate it. If we can't do an independent investigation, what are we worth? Well, the Chinese representative said exactly the same thing. That's big. Yeah, you talk about the Russians being isolated. No, wait, 1 billion, 1.4 billion people in China, more in India. The Russians aren't isolated. On the Security Council, now it's 3 against 2. But that's a big deal because there used to be only one. Now China is fully aboard. So what happened? Well, the Chinese said we should discuss this. Everybody else said, no. What McGovern and Sachs are saying, that's a conspiracy theorist. We don't need to do anything. So long story short, the resolution has to be voted on. God knows when that will happen. But we know the result. The U.S. will veto it and probably get the Brits and the French to veto it too. But will it not become abundantly transparent to the world what's going on here? The Security Council refuses to do an independent investigation of this horrid act. Well, it really depends now on the Germans. Olaf Scholz is in Washington today. What's he talking about? Well, everybody's saying, he's talking about more arms to Ukraine, more. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about, Mr. Biden, I'm in trouble. I stood next to you on the 7th of February last year. And, well, you know what happened. You said, the background here is that the intelligence agencies had been tasked by the president to find out if they could blow up the pipeline and keep it secret, just disguise the hand that did it. And they had just come to their planning was such that in November, December, yeah, we can do it. But for God's sake, don't say anything about it. We can disguise our hand. Nobody will know who blew it up. Well, I mean, I wish this were funny, but when President Biden was asked by a very gutsy Reuters reporter. She was a woman and she was bilingual. And she said, Mr. Biden, what about this Nord Stream pipeline? And Biden says, as if reading from notes, if Russia invades Ukraine, there will be no more Nord Stream pipeline. And she says, well, how you going to do that? I mean, uh, Germany controls that, Russia. Biden, I promise you, we'll do it. Now, most people have seen that clip, but we intelligence analysts, we always look for the rest of the clip. And here's the rest of the clip. Bilingual Reuters correspondent says, Chancellor Scholz, was halten Sie davon? What do you think about all that? And Scholz has this painful look on him. And he says, we do everything together. There's nothing important that we do that we don't do together. So the German people are now waking up and they're saying, Chancellor Scholz, did you do the blowing up of the pipeline together? Or were you blindsided? Did the President of the United States not tell you of the plan when you met there in early February of last year? Or did he tell you? I mean, so Scholz is in hot water, okay? Now, what's amusing about this? Not really amusing, but it's very telling. The announcement yesterday was, after the meeting between Scholz and Biden, there will be no press conference. I mean, for obvious reasons. First time ever, no press conference. So this just by way of saying that this is the crucible for the German people. Are they going to allow themselves to be pushed around anymore by the U.S. to the point of losing segments of their economy and having to pay 6 or 7 times the price for American liquefied natural gas as they had been paying for Russian gas? We'll have to see. I don't know how it's going to come out, but the issue is joined, and I have friends in Germany who will keep me well apprised of what's going on. First and foremost, the fact that there were 50,000 demonstrators in Berlin last Saturday. Nobody expected that many. I think that number will grow as people become sensitized to the fact that, we've been led down the primrose path here. Chancellor Scholz, did you do that together? Or did the U.S. surprise you on that? In either case, what the hell kind of chancellor are you?
Yeah. I mean, all very good points, and that gets me to following up on this, where for Germany now, and this also relates to the sanctions that have been put onto Russia by the EU and the United States. Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world. Now you have a situation where you have, I think, the Nord Stream attack being the biggest, most extreme case of this backfiring, right? It completely and utterly places Germany's economy in tatters. Germany's not even going to grow, according to a lot of projections from economists at the IMF and other places. It's not even going to grow in step with Russia, despite Russia's sanctions. Russia's supposed to grow maybe twice as much as Germany this coming year. Of course, that's subject to change, but that's the projections. I'm wondering, though, there are stories with all of this backfire. It seems like the Ukraine conflict has caused a lot of desperation in what has been called by some the collective West, the U.S. and the NATO sphere. Things aren't going quite how I think the United States and NATO wanted it on the battlefield. The sanctions are not going exactly, I think, how the policy planners expected them to go with regard to Russia. Now you have this narrative. I want your comments on this. this narrative of now it's strange. It's almost like inserting China for the US 1 year ago. 1 year ago, we heard the United States sending lethal aid to Ukraine, right, to get it ready to defend itself from a possible Russian invasion. Now you have these same people saying in the media, in the foreign policy establishment, that China is about to do this. And now it's led to a flurry of new sanctions. Now, new sanctions on Chinese entities and tech corporations. And this is an ongoing story. And now they're sending F-16s to Taiwan, or missiles to the F-16s in Taiwan. What do you make of this? Because from the beginning, for me and how I've talked about on this channel, this war in Ukraine, this conflict in Ukraine, and this escalation against Russia has always been about Russia and China from the perspective of especially the United States' overall foreign policy strategy. What's your take on what's been going on, what you've been hearing? I don't know if you've been following the kind of hysterics recently. It's almost been a flurry over the last several days with regard to China.
Well, I have been following it, and it is really, truly amazing. If I haven't said this already, the most important factoid, the most important change in the world correlation of forces, a term the Soviets used to use, is that the old triangular relationship with Russia, China, and the United States, used to be sort of equilateral, right? Now it's isosceles with us, with the US on the short end of the stick, so to speak, okay? Russia and China are in a virtual alliance. They describe it as something that exceeds the normal alliance. And last February, they said there is no upper end to their cooperation. And, when push came to shove, when Putin invaded Ukraine, China gave him a waiver on the bedrock Chinese policy of non-interference in the affairs of other countries, violation of sovereignty, hello, they gave him a waiver, and they fully supported it. And the U.S. seemed oblivious to the fact that the Chinese were in this with the Russians. They keep saying the Chinese are playing a real clever game. They won't commit to Russia. They won't. Well, come on. The Chinese have been there supporting the Russians since last February, when the invasion took place. You'll remember that Putin was in Beijing for the beginning of the Olympics. On the 4th of February last year, they issued an incredible statement saying that there is no end to our relationship. And then, as I put it together, and this is not factual, okay, this is the only part of things that's not factual. The way I put it together is that Putin, having said, well, the West is not serious about our concerns about short-range missiles, offensive strike missiles. They still want to get Ukraine into NATO. They're killing lots of Russian-speaking people in the Donbass. And the Nazis are running things pretty much, the proto or novo or neo-Nazis running things in Kiev. Mr. Xi, best friend Xi, says Putin, I think I'm going to have to clean them out, the more so since they're grouping to attack Donbass as we speak. Now, what's my idea? Again, just McGovern's idea of how Xi Jinping reacted to that. Vladimir, you mean after the Olympics are over, right? Olympics were over on the 22nd of February. Donetsk and Lugansk were recognized as independent countries by Russia the next day. Parliament approved on the 24th. There was the invasion. So it's not real hard to realize that the Chinese are in this with the Russians. Now, what's going to happen on the ground in Ukraine? The Russians said initially that one of their two objectives, first was denazification, but then demilitarization. That means killing all Ukrainian forces that the Russians can kill. Now, they weren't after civilians, they were after the Ukrainian armed forces. There's a place called Bakhmut now in Donetsk, and there's been big fighting in there for about 3 months. And guess what? The Ukrainians keep sending new troops in there, and the Russians start killing all the new troops. Okay, so the Russians, after killing as many more Ukrainian troops as come there with the Russian artillery and everything, okay, when Bakhmut is cleaned out, like most people think it may be today or tomorrow, okay, the Russians will have precious little between them and the Dnieper River. Precious little overstatement. There are some high ground still between Bakhmut and the Dnieper, but they can get to the Dnieper if they want to in another month or so. Then it'll become clear, then it will become clear that the Ukrainians have not been winning as we have been all taught, but that the Russians pretty much have won. Whom do we blame it on? Any ideas? Let's blame it on China. I mean, that's the way these minds work. They're highly educated geniuses from the best schools. We'll blame it on China. We'll say China's given them offensive weaponry, and that's what turned the tide. Now, this is crazy. This is really crazy. Here's the, just yesterday, I guess it was, here's a report from the committee, the China committee, newly formed in the House. A fellow named Gallagher heads it up. Here's a report from NBC News, usually not so frank. Quote, like a cinematic experience in examining the strategic competition with the Communist Party of China tonight, we've gotten a good sense of the heroes and the villains. There's no question in my mind that we, Americans, are the good guys, said Representative Gallagher in closing. Quote, we are the good guys that even on our worst day, the rest of the world is still looking to us for leadership. Leadership. Now, the Greek word for leadership is hegemony. It comes from hegemon, okay? It doesn't mean just leadership, it means dominance. And, the real interesting thing here is that the Chinese have taken the gloves off. They issued a foreign ministry statement last weekend, which won't quit in terms of criticizing what's going on in the U.S. I want to just quote a little bit of this because it's very telling. Here's the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement against, here's the title, U.S. hegemony and its perils. It is incredibly blunt. It's incredibly direct. This is what it says. This is actually the last paragraph of the conclusion. It gives you a flavor of what it is and how the rhetoric has been stepped up. Countries need to respect each other and treat each other as equals. Big countries should take the lead in pursuing a new model of state-to-state relations, featuring dialogue and partnership, not confrontation. The United States must let go of its arrogance and quit its hegemonic, domineering, and bullying practices, because all nations need to treat each other as equals. That sounds very much like what I quoted before from Mr. Putin, that op-ed in the New York Times. He said, we're all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. So there's no place for domineering. There's no place for what the Chinese, in an exceptionally brutal language, call domineering, bullying, arrogance, hegemonic practices. I think most people in the world would see that for what it is. And so what we have now is a situation where the Chinese are enemy number one. Now, we get rid of the Russians first, but one of the ways we confront the Chinese by accusing them of helping Russia to win in Ukraine, okay? And even, last thing here, even Farid Zakaria today in the Washington Post. The title is Washington has succumbed to dangerous groupthink on China. Well, hello, Farid. You've been helpful in making that groupthink so prevalent. This is a good sign. I mean, somebody who has some influence and usually takes a nonsensical line is owning up to the fact, my God, do we really want to get involved in a war with China? Last thing I'll say on this, and this really be the last thing. And correct me if I've done so many interviews, I may have said this already. At Vide Discussion Club at the end of October last year, 27th it was, Vladimir Putin gave a speech for about 45 minutes. Then he hung around, ad-libbed answers to questions for 3 more hours, okay? Now, at one point, one of the questions was, how do you explain what the U.S. is doing in taking on China as well as Russia? I mean, what do you think? And Putin says, and this is a direct quote, or almost direct quote, it doesn't make any logical sense, does it? I have to conclude that they're crazy. I earlier, says Putin, I earlier thought there was some subtle plan here or some contrivance, but I no longer think so. I attribute it to overweening arrogance and a feeling of immunity. So, I mean, I don't agree with everything Putin says, but how else do you explain these geniuses about to get us in a two-front war just because we are exceptional, just because we are the good guys and they're the bad guys? I mean, hello, are we not more sensible than that?
Yeah. I mean, those are all great points, and I actually want to follow up that with a question from a Patreon subscriber of mine. Everyone, for those who may be new to this stream, new to this channel, you can subscribe on Patreon or on YouTube or on Substack. You can find all those links in the description and submit questions to guests. And so one of them has come from a person named Phil, who asks, and I think this is very related to what you just said, this two-front war, because there are a lot of concerns about nuclear war and about World War III when it comes to this two-front conflict the U.S. is escalating with China and Russia. And Phil asks, do you think that there are people in the quote-unquote power elite who could become so desperate to hold on to power and privilege that they would actually drop a nuclear bomb on Russia and force them to surrender, thus maintaining U.S. hegemony? I guess you could also include China in there. I'll just add to this person's question, since this is an escalating conflict with both, as you put it. What are your thoughts?
It's not my thoughts, it's my fear. I mean, these people are not thinking in a rational way. Putin may call them crazy. I think it's more this arrogance, this more exceptionalism, this more elitist feeling that, look, we're the geniuses here. We came from the best school. I mean, we saw it before, for God's sake. The best and the brightest, resulting in 3 million Vietnamese being killed and 58,000 American troops. So would it go nuclear? Well, if we get involved in a war with China, we're going to lose unless it goes nuclear. Then we all lose. If we get involved in trying to shore up what's left of Ukraine, after the Russians make it clear that this is an existential threat for them, that they're going to hold on to what they've already gotten and make a deal if they can with the Dnieper, for example, that river dividing east from west Ukraine. If we insist on winning, that's when nuclear weapons might come into play. Now, Russia has been careful to remind people, look, don't forget we have nuclear weapons. Why do they do that? Because these geniuses seem to have forgotten that. I mean, I went through the whole Cold War. I mean, what the US and Russia avoided doing was confronting each other directly, was making an existential threat from one to the other. So it makes eminent good sense for Putin and Medvedev and the others to say, look, please don't forget we have nuclear weapons. Well, are the Russians going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine? No. Why? Because they don't have to. They can very well conventionally defeat the Ukrainians, and they're well on their way to doing that. Now, could it escalate? Well, all depends on what Washington decides to do. And, the final escalation, of course, would be a nuclear, one of these, a little tactical thing, sort of like no more powerful than what we used in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, just, 15 K, or maybe 10 kilos. Oh, come on, give me a break. I mean, there are high-level military officers that sort of taken that line. And if I were Putin, I would be on high alert. So let's all hope and pray that these elitists, these very genius people who are advising Biden, wake up and say, well, look, we may have been able to shove our way into the halls of power in Washington. It's a bigger world. China is against us as well as Russia. Do we really want to inflict nuclear war on our children? I think some of them have children as well.
Sorry, I was muted. The build up to this has been quite astonishing to me because, I think the rhetoric and the policy are becoming just so, I don't know how to say absurd, because you not only have this blame China now for the situation with regard to Ukraine, for this conflict that, as you outlined in the beginning here, was so quite obviously a provocation. It was so obviously provoked by the US, by NATO, that there was so many moves, so many policies that led to this, including NATO encirclement. But not only this, you now have the fact that there is this straight up policy of building up to this point where you have China now being the target of legitimate proxy war activity in Taiwan. I mean, there was just a bill passed, I believe it was yesterday, that Biden approved of, which sends missiles to F-16s, and which, despite all of the rhetoric of, well, it's China's fault, China has issued a peace proposal for Ukraine, as they're saying that China is about to send weapons, which justify then the US and these elites across the NATO sphere to continue their onslaught of sanctions and sending weapons and supporting separatism in Taiwan and all this nonsense. I mean, it just it's like this flurry of madness that has swept over this what some have called, I call, an empire. I mean, it seems like it's a crumbling empire that has gone increasingly mad to maintain its power. I don't know if you have any reaction to that before I get to the last question here.
Well, the Russian word for mad or insane is sumashiji. Mind, out of mind, shichi, having gone out of your mind. Okay? That's what Putin is accusing the US policymakers of having done. Now, it doesn't matter what you, Danny, or what me, Ray, think about all this. What matters is what Putin and the Russian leaders and Xi Jinping and the Chinese leaders have to conclude about this. Their military has to weigh capabilities, not intentions. I was a military intelligence analyst. We didn't bother about intentions. We had to weigh enemy capabilities. Okay. Now, more is cranked in, of course, with respect to intentions, but the capabilities are really a key aspect here. And the U.S. doesn't have the capability of winning a war in the Far East against China, or even winning a war in Europe, in Ukraine. They don't have the capability without using nuclear weapons. So if I'm a Soviet or a Russian planner or a Chinese planner, I would say, what the what the hell is in the mind of these people? Don't they realize that we have the conventional advantage and that we can roll over Ukraine, next couple of months? What are they going to do then? That's the issue now. I'm not quite sure I answered your question though. Did I, Danny?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a fair point. I think what I'm kind of baffled by in terms of the political environment right now is this divergence where you have China being blamed now for what's going on in Ukraine. There's rumors about them sending weapons. The U.S. has pledged and sent some of these pledges to Ukraine, upwards of 40 plus billion. We're getting 100 plus billion worth of aid to Ukraine since this conflict began, or at least the special military operation that Russia has launched began in 2022 of last year. So that is what I think is so baffling, given that, I mean, it's right up in our faces now. And it seems like this flurry of just, I mean, what else can we call it but outright propaganda to get us thinking that China is the enemy, and even also that Russia is the unprovoked enemy. It's kind of just doing what it wants as a imperialist. You'll hear this in the media. I'm sure you've seen Russia's imperialist. Russia wants to go back to the empire. Russia wants to reimagine and reproduce what the Soviet Union was back during the 20th century. So I guess that's really what's been sticking out for me as of late, given that it feels like you just look up, just type in China in Google, and it's just Biden, one thing after another, building up this two-front war as the situation in Ukraine deteriorates, as you said.
Well, let me bring to the forefront an aspect that we really haven't touched on, but which is critical and underlying all this, and that is what Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. Most of your listeners will know that as he went out in his farewell address, he said, "Look, beware of the accretion of power endangering our democracy, the accretion of power on the part of the military industrial complex. The only antidote to prevent that is a well informed citizenry." Now, you may know, Danny, that I've coined an acronym which now appears in some dictionaries. The Mickey Mat. Sort of rhymes with Mickey Mouse, so you can remember it. Mickey Mat. Got a pencil? Military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank, complex. Mickey Mat. Okay, why did I say media as if in all caps? Because media is the linchpin. As Eisenhower said, if you don't have a well informed citizenry, the military-industrial complex, and more so the Mickey Mat is going to prevail, and they're going to accrete, if that's the right word. They're going to assemble enough power to do in our democracy. Now, there are lots of people profiteering on these wars, and lots of people making the missiles for these F-16s going out to Taiwan. Lockheed, Raytheon. I mean, they're making a bunch of money on all this stuff, and that is not a negligible factor. Let me adduce a memory here I have. Pope Francis addressed a joint session of Congress 2015, I think it was. He came and he spoke, and what he said was quite amazing because he called a spade a spade. What he said was, the main problem today is the, what do you call it? Is the blood-soaked arms trade. Blood-drenched is another way he said, blood-drenched arms trade. Oh, so what happened? These representatives, senators got him, yay! Way to go, Pope! And then they looked in their pockets to see what if the last envelope from Raytheon was in there, and one over here, one from Lockheed. It was giving hypocrisy a bad name. But the Pope had it right, and I was surprised that he said it. I was not surprised that nobody reported what he said, because the media is in with all these people. So, Danny, as we were saying before we started here, I applaud you and anybody else who's trying to get the truth up and out. We have to do that. We have to do that now, because with these Sumashechi people, well, Dr. King had it right when he said, there is such a thing as too late.
Yeah. Well, I have one final question from a Patreon subscriber. It's actually a little, I guess you could say, off topic, but they're curious. A person who goes by Cultus wanted to ask you, what is your opinion of Philip Agee, who was a CIA whistleblower who became a socialist? What's your opinion? I think that he also helped found Covert Action magazine. Any thoughts on Mr. Agee?
I've learned a lot about Phil Agee since I was stationed abroad. I respect and I applaud the revelations he made. Many of them were right on point. I was serving abroad when he revealed the names of countless spies, people working with agents in our spies in our government. That was a mistake, I thought. That was not a good idea. So my reactions to Phil Agee have been tainted by that initial realization that some people have been really hurt. People doing good work, trying to recruit people to tell us what's going on and wherever, that their careers were at an end. And that's a personal sort of thing. And I know several of them. So that attenuates my admiration for the kind of guts he showed. And I think that his son and those other people, Jerry Kuzmarov and others, who are writing that wonderful magazine now, what do they call it? Covert Action magazine. They're doing a terrific job. As a matter of fact, they did a personal thing on me and my record on telling the true story on Russiagate.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about Russiagate, because we even touch on that. And that is I think that is a huge factor in all that's going on now. But Mr. McGovern, Mr. Ray McGovern, it's been really great speaking with you. Everyone stick around. I am going to cover a few stories here to close up. But Ray, do you have anything that you'd like to say in parting before you head out today?
Well, just this, Danny. Thanks for having me on. But when we talk about Russiagate, The bottom line is, well, let me put it in personal terms. I have a really good friend up in New York City, went to high school and college with. We're as close as you can be. He told me last time we spoke, Ray, nothing you can say will persuade me that Putin is other than a. He couldn't get the adjective or noun out of his mouth because he's just too decent a guy. He didn't want to say Hitler or Stalin or the devil or anything, but that's what he felt. That's what he has been inculcated to believe. So that's a personal thing. The Russiagate thing, that's a monumental, political thing. And just in brief, the United States populace has been brainwashed, and I use the term advisedly, been brainwashed to believe that Putin is the devil incarnate, that he was responsible for Donald Trump, for God's sake. I mean, that's okay. And that he interfered in our election. He did blah, 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 blah. And that's been for 6+ years, almost 7 years now. Okay. That has its cumulative effect. And if Biden and his acolytes say, well, Putin is really bad, he's clearly the bad guys, and we are the good guys. Even on our worst day, the rest of the world is looking at us for leadership. Whoa! So let's try this little tactical nuclear weapon to redress the situation in Ukraine. I mean, most of the American people would say, oh, well, if you have to do that, because these guys are really the bad guys. So I'll leave it at there. But all I'm saying is that not only was it a lie, it was a consequential lie. And most Americans believe it and could be kind of brainwashed into supporting a god-awful war. Thanks, Danny. Sorry to keep you so late.
No. Thank you so much for coming, Mr. McGovern. We'll have to be in touch soon to do it again. Thanks so much. Take good care.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye. So that was a great conversation, everybody. As you are rolling in or getting ready for the next segment of this program, be sure to hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. So hitting the like button actually gets more people in here because YouTube doesn't always like our channel here, doesn't always like to boost it. It's hard sometimes for people to get notified. So hit that like button, hit that notifications bell, and that subscribe button. And of course, if you'd also like to submit questions to the guests, suggest guests, and also just get exclusive content from me, you can subscribe at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. And you should also subscribe to Substack either for free or for an annual membership so that you can get on the newsletter, which is also free. With that said, everyone, I wanted to cover one story before I headed out of here today. That was a great conversation, really fun. Mr. McGovern, Mr. Ray McGovern, certainly knows his stuff, knows his history, and I was very appreciative to have him on. So what I wanted to talk about, I can take these off now. What I wanted to talk about before I head out today was the flurry that I mentioned with Ray McGovern, this flurry of misinformation and escalations toward China, because the brainwashing is very real. It's happening as we speak. And this two-front war is very serious. It is not some kind of maybe it will, maybe it won't. It's not conjecture. It's not hypothetical. It is a development that's occurring now. The United States is setting its sights on China, does have plans for China. We have covered here on this program all of the facets of this proxy war, this new Cold War on China, from the misinformation and propaganda on human rights issues, from the economic sanctions on tech, the trade war, etc., the military encirclement by the United States via Japan, South Korea, troops stationed, hundreds of military bases. We've had John Pilger on this program talk about his work on that. So we've covered this before, but now you've heard it. If you've been paying attention to the Western mainstream media of late, you've heard it, right? China's going to send weapons to Russia. Antony Blinken says so. NATO chief, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, he says so. Everyone in the collective West is saying, China, don't you send weapons to Russia. Why are they doing this? Well, one, as Mr. McGovern said here on this program, the Ukraine battlefield situation is deteriorating. Bakhmut's encirclement is leading to what will eventually be a Russian victory in that meat grinder that's lasted for how many months now? That situation's about to reach a climax in a Russian victory that will lead to a further deterioration of what already has been a deteriorating situation for Ukraine. You've heard about the weapons pledges that won't get to Ukraine in time, and it's not even going to supply Ukraine with what it had a year ago at this time. So the situation in Ukraine is not looking too good. The sanctions have backfired. There's been a whole miscalculation by the collective West. They thought, the neocons thought, well, these sanctions are going to work. Russia's going to fall. Russia's going to be destabilized. Ukraine is going to win on the battlefield because they'll be supported by an unstable internal Russia situation inside of Russia, politically, economically. We'll be fine. We're going to win this, even if it is protracted, even if it is prolonged. Well, it turns out that's not the case. So now, as China has proposed a peace plan or a proposal, so to speak, a process by which a guidance framework, what people can look at and say, well, these are the 10 points that we can follow to get to peace in Ukraine. You have Hungary, you have a lot of governments in the Baltic states, you have so many countries supporting this plan. As all that's happening, you hear, well, China's going to send weapons. China's going to send weapons. Meanwhile, China has sent $0 in military aid to Russia up until this point. Zero. While the United States has sent $100+ billion. So the hypocrisy is very real, but it's led to real escalations because whenever you hear a narrative, a rumor circulating about China or Russia, you better believe that there's policy behind that. So let's look at some of this, and we're going to go real fast. All right. So buckle up because I'm not going to really go over these articles. I just want to show you what's been happening. So it really started with China spotting a spy plane, and this isn't new, and I'm going to show you why. So the United States said that it caught a Boeing P-8 Poseidon spy jet doing patrol and reconnaissance over the Taiwan Strait, and this was last Monday, the last day of February. So China was infuriated by this. Now, why was China so mad? Was it because it's a one-off, or is it because it's a pattern? Well, in fact, it's a pattern. Regionally, this military encirclement by the United States is not something that just happens once in a while. No, it's part of a general occupation and military encirclement of the entire region toward China. And so the Global Times, a week before this incident, showed us how this happens. So you remember the balloon incident. This is very related. There's the balloon incident. China supposedly sent a balloon over the United States late last month in February saying, we're spying on you through a balloon that everyone can see. Well, despite how ridiculous that was and the millions of dollars the United States spent shooting down that balloon and then likely recreational balloons from U.S. citizens and civilians after that incident, nonetheless, the reality is that the United States has actually adopted multiple means, as the Global Times points out here, of reconnaissance on China, including more than 600 reconnaissance flights to the South China Sea in 2022. That's 600 plus in the South China Sea. A lot of these have to do with this military encirclement campaign, if not all of them. So you have this blatant hypocrisy. Well, the latest now is these reports. Okay, you have a lot of reports about China stepping up its overall aggression in the South China Sea, that it's sending planes and ships toward Taiwan. And so that's been reported in the Associated Press a couple of days ago, saying there was 25 Chinese planes and 3 ships sent toward the island. China was condemned by the U.S.'s stooges in the Taiwan authorities. It was also condemned by the United States, of course. And what has the United States done in response? This is where it gets really predictable, right? What has the United States done? Well, it's escalated the situation. It's done what it has always planned to do, and that is continue to militarily ramp up in Taiwan as the primary focal point of a proxy war on China, similar to what the United States has done against Russia and Ukraine. So the Biden administration approved potential sale of missiles for F-16s in Taiwan, and that's an estimated $600 million potential arms sale to Taiwan, which has been approved by the U.S. president. So now, amidst all of this, it hasn't just been the military encirclement campaign. We had reports, okay? We had reports, not just China's peace proposal, but also China is going through its 2 sessions this weekend. And there were reports coming out of Bloomberg. I'm not going to pull that one up, but Bloomberg reported at the beginning of March that observers, i.e., U.S. economists, Western economists, think tank experts, foreign policy sort of wonks from the political establishment in the United States, they've been shocked by China's economic recovery. And that shouldn't shock anyone, though, because the IMF has already projected China's economy will likely grow between 4 and 7%. And now China continues to move that needle up. Now it's about 5.5% projected growth in 2023, while the entire collective West sits in either stagnant growth or negative growth. So if you take the UK, for example, the United States, Germany, you can name the biggest major Western collective West economies. They're all stagnating or declining. And it's a lot of which has to do with the sanctions and how investors and how governments have responded to sanctions with higher interest rates, etc. So with all of that said, what does the United States do in this situation? Does the United States say, well, maybe we should focus on what's actually causing the problem, what's actually causing all of this global instability? Does it say, well, it's time to maybe do the right thing here and just count our losses and, begin a process of rational policy with regard to China and Russia? Is it time to assess this situation for what it is and start to lay down an off-ramp? Absolutely not. Instead, the United States is seeking allies, is backing for more sanctions over these so-called allegations against China. And this seeking has actually led to more sanctions, okay? You have Olaf Scholz in the White House today visiting Biden, but you've actually had more sanctions. So while they are seeking allies' approval through the Group of 7, the G7, they want to coordinate, okay? We've had more sanctions. We've had 37 entities, okay? 37 Chinese entities, Russian entities, Iranian entities. These are just companies, businesses that have been sanctioned for these very reasons. And now the U.S. is seeking their allies' approval. So more sanctions, despite how counterproductive they've been now that the sanctions are impacting the world economy as a whole. Doesn't matter. The United States is going to keep pushing forward. And so all of this is justified on the basis that China is the aggressor, similar to what they've said about Russia. China is the problem. China is provoking in Ukraine now. Russia was unprovoked in invading. Now it's China prolonging the crisis, despite the fact that the United States has done everything it can, along with its collective West buddies, to do this exact thing. This is how far flung from reality all of this is becoming. All right. So how far off from reality has this actually gone is the question. And we can just look at this Taiwan situation as a focal point for how absurd this has all become, how absurd this escalation with China has become. So as the United States ramps up weapons sales to Taiwan in complete violation of their own joint communiques with China around the One China policy, as it spreads these absurd rumors about weapons, you'll hear often whenever there's a question about Taiwan and China, what China's doing in the Taiwan Strait, you'll often hear China is crossing the Air Defense Identification Zone, the ADIZ. And they'll promote this ADIZ as an official airspace of Taiwan. Number one, Taiwan is a territory of China. That's acknowledged not just by the United States through 3 joint communiques, but it's also acknowledged by the United Nations. So not only that, though, there's often this misunderstanding of what the ADIZ is, because most people who read the news, especially those who are just passively consuming mainstream Western media, they're not thinking, well, what's the ADIZ? If it's said in Reuters, if it's said in the Associated Press, then it must be true. Well, the ADIZ is not a legitimately recognized international uh, 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 policy. It is not sanctioned by the United Nations. The ADIZ, like all ADIZs, really came out of World War II. They came out of a World War II order where the United States wanted to redraw the world for its own purposes. And that's exactly what it has done. And the ADIZ was a creation of the United States after World War II, after the Chinese Revolution, but especially in that period before it, to mark out territory that it would then protect, as Taiwan, or Formosa at the time, was supposed to be its unsinkable aircraft carrier, similar to how Japan viewed Taiwan back when it was colonizing Taiwan. So the ADIZ is not legitimate. And so if you look at the ADIZ here, let me just try to zoom in. This works. Yeah, it will work, I think. So here you have the ADIZ. All right. This is on my Telegram, so you can follow me there, t.me/Dhaiphong, China and Geopolitics with Danny Dhaiphong. So here it is. All right. The ADIZ. You have this red box. Notice anything funny about it? Well, one thing you might find hilarious is that the Air Defense Identification Zone not only covers Taiwan's so-called airspace, which it is not a recognized nation in the United Nations, so in effect, it doesn't really have an airspace. But if you recognize this box, you see this mainland China is covered in it. So meaning that the ADIZ actually leaks into mainland China, Fujian province being the main part of the mainland, which gets kind of subsumed into this ADIZ. So, and then you see the others, right? South Korea and Japan. You can see how these ADIZs are really just instruments for surrounding China. And this goes back to the fact that this new Cold War didn't really start, this war on China didn't really start in 2011, even with the pivot to Asia, or 2010, 9, wherever you want to trace the pivot to Asia. It really did start after the Chinese Revolution. And it really did start when the United States became the superpower, because then the United States had kind of free reign to enact a foreign policy with a weaker Japan. And then, of course, you saw what happened during the Korean War. And you saw how the United States in 2 Taiwan Straits crises ended up escalating with China to a degree where there was almost a nuke between China and the United States. Or I should say, at this time, China did not yet have a nuclear weapon. So it was really a nuclear war the United States was trying to launch on its own without any kind of mutually assured destruction aspect to it. It was simply the United States wanted to drop nukes on China because it did not want to lose China to communism. If you remember the Cold War, that was the big narrative. So here you have the ADIZ, everyone. This is how absurd it gets. The ADIZ is not just not recognized by international law. It is not a legitimate division of airspace, given the fact that it includes parts of mainland China. So why does Taiwan's authorities, if you're going to legitimize them as such, Why do Taiwan's authorities get to have F-16s that fly over mainland, that supposedly can fly over mainland China, but China can't sail and fly through Taiwan Strait when the Taiwan Strait, or Taiwan, I should say, as an island, as a territory, is internationally recognized as Chinese territory. So this is where all of this becomes so incredibly absurd. But this really is about fueling the military industrial complex. It really is fueling this neocon agenda with China now, this US foreign policy establishment agenda with China. And it's a buildup to this bigger war, because you heard all throughout the end of 2022 that this was going to be a focus, that now the US is ready for the next war. And that's because the United States is always at war. The United States has been at war for more than 80% of its entire history. And we're just talking about war abroad. Forget how the United States waged wars in order to expand territory here. We can't forget that. We can't forget the wars it fought to preserve slavery. We cannot forget its role in trying to suppress the Haitian Revolution. We can't forget its role in the Philippines. We can't forget its role over the course of 2 centuries, because that informs what the United States is doing today. And so the United States has identified China along with Russia as the 2 principal adversaries, and is enacting policy as such to prepare the way for this larger conflict. And I got to tell you that if you thought what was happening with Russia was backfiring on the United States and the collective West, you better believe that it is backfiring, and it will backfire, and it will be devastating to the United States and to the collective West to do this with China. China is integrated into the global economy. China is, if you think Russia has allies and isn't isolated, China is for sure not isolated. Europe has a really hard time, despite its rhetorical subservience and in a lot of ways willingness to go along with whatever the United States does. The Europeans, the European Union, they have a really hard time trying to treat China like Russia, because they know that the economic consequences will be even more vast. And they already have been. Because if you only thought that the sanctions on Russia have increased inflation, well, these sanctions on Chinese tech companies, these sanctions on certain parts, whether it's polysilicon for renewable energy or what have you, all of that has also led to inflation. Because what it has done, it has, and China talks about this all the time, it has distorted the supply chain system. It has distorted the economic realities on the ground inside of the US, inside of China, inside of places like Taiwan. It creates a lot of disruptions. And the United States, you have Ro Khanna, you have Lindsey Graham, you have these forces, no matter if they're red or blue, it doesn't matter. They all agree on economic war with China. That's how absurd it's become. So all of this aggression on China, there is bipartisan agreement. They talk about it all the time. We need to protect our supply chains, not remembering that actually, if you are to pull, let's say, Taiwan away from China, you're not only going to destroy Taiwan, but you're going to make it incredibly hard for the entire world to get access to high tech, which China is a world leader in. One of the things that's very interesting is you have these think tanks like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. They have come out and said the United States and the West are lagging behind China in basically all of the emerging high-tech industries. This is well known. This isn't a secret. But not only do you have China's rise being such a threat in the technological sphere, you have the economic growth that I mentioned, which is robust. You also have areas like poverty alleviation, multipolarity and integration in projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, de-dollarization. All these policies that China pursues are antithetical to the collective West's hegemony and the United States' hegemony. That is all very true, right? And of course, China is also an open critic of sanctions and U.S. hegemony. And as Mr. McGovern said on this program, they have a paper that they've released recently, the China's Foreign Ministry, talking about U.S. hegemony and its perils. But the United States is also concerned about China's capabilities. They're concerned about China's capabilities. And what they're really concerned about, we've covered it here on this channel. I had Brian Berletic on recently, and we listened to Zhao Bo. And Zhao Bo was a former senior colonel of the People's Liberation Army in the Air Force. Now he's a professor at Tsinghua University. And he had something to say. He said, we're not interested in building up a military, an advanced military that is capable of defeating the United States' military. We're only interested in building a military that can defend China and defend the Pacific from, from outside forces and China's interests from outside forces. And one of the biggest threats, and the Atlantic Council has admitted this, I'm going to show you how. One of the biggest threats from China is the fact that it has the capacity to bring together all of its allies to all forms of cooperation, including militarily. So if you thought China's military was advanced, well, you also have to factor in that other countries like Russia, and now you have South Africa, as the Atlantic Council surmises here, as being willing and able to train together and fight together, possibly. Because remember, China has actually fought on the African continent. They did help train and send certain forces, logistical forces, to the African continent for in the fight for independence. They did this. They sent millions to Korea, lost 200,000+ people in Korea during the Korean War. So China has the ability, even in the modern era, and they hold these annual drills with Russia and South Africa that are really scaring the collective West. And so the Atlantic Council, which is NATO's think tank, had this to say. So they had something to learn, right, from it, from these drills. And I want to show you what they had to say about it. So I just need to find the correct paragraph. Okay. So they're not happy with this. Okay. They're not happy that China has the capacity to do this. And they're trying to focus on South Africa here as if it's not the fact that South Africa is just attracted to China and to its alliance and relations with China and to its relationship with Russia as well. And this is what really scares the collective West. And so this is what they had to say. Okay. South Africa has repeatedly emphasized its neutrality vis-a-vis Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the president of South Africa, has asserted he would be willing to mediate a peace resolution, and it's stretching its limits of neutrality here through its military and friendly and routine drills with Russia. Okay, so they're scared of this. They're scared of this. And they're talking about how China's focus on maritime and building warships and building up is also very scary. So these are all experts talking about what message does this send? And this is the big one. At the very least, these drills send a message that South Africa is not concerned with Ukraine. It is not interested in towing the Western line. South Africa would prefer to highlight its independence and willingness to conduct international relations as it sees fit. And why is that important when it comes to Russia and China? It's because Russia and China are alternatives to this idea that they have to toe the Western line. These are BRICS countries, right? In this alliance, this BRICS alliance, where they're coming up with an alternative international financial model to an alternative to the dollar, but they're also coordinating militarily every year. And so you heard it from the Atlantic Council. South Africa is not so interested in towing the Western line. Well, that's strange because the United States has done everything, and the West has done everything it can to ensure that post-apartheid South Africa would be aligned with the West's overall vision for world affairs, aka world domination. But actually, China and Russia are providing this alternative to the point where NATO is getting scared of this possibility that it's not just that they have to worry about China rising, surpassing economically the United States and the collective West, becoming an advanced technological power, a self-described socialist country, highly developed, raising the standards of living, putting curbs on investments, runaway, primitive and parasitic investment, right? Ensuring that its central bank is not owned by Wall Street. Despite all of those things, those are all real. Multipolarity, international, integration, those are all real concerns, right? With China alone, then Russia with its military might, its increasingly independent foreign policy, its willingness to work with anybody to preserve its sovereignty and to increase its own stability. All those are big concerns. I mean, if you've read the Wolfowitz Doctrine, you know that these are huge concerns of the United States and the neocons. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see a united Russia, united China be able to rise and grow and become more and more powerful because they have different visions for what that power should be used for. However, the biggest concern in my eye is that China and Russia will then galvanize the world. And they don't even necessarily have to do this directly. They don't have to say, come with us. We're leading a new vision. Let's ditch the West. Let's fight the West. No, they don't even have to do that. All they have to do is do what they're doing and then present opportunities. And those countries like South Africa, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, everywhere, all over Africa, Latin America, Asia, they can all say, who are we going to choose? Are we going to choose to align with China and Russia, which are giving us alternatives to the dollar, infrastructure development, military cooperation? They're not telling us who should lead us, who should rule us, who should dominate us. No, they're not doing that. So they're weighing that option versus the United States, which is saying, well, you need to do everything that we say. You need to have a government that does everything we say. You need to, your economy needs to be subservient to us. Your political system needs to be subservient to us. So those are your two options. What do you think most of the world is going to do? And that's exactly what's happened. Most of the world is going to choose the other side unless you're vassals and completely already attached at the hip and cannot separate yourself, as we've seen with Europe. So that's the situation right now with China. It's getting very dangerous. The escalations are happening as we speak. And we have to pay attention to this in league with what's happening in the Ukraine conflict, because they are going to constantly and inevitably be bouncing off of each other. And these linkages are going to be ever more apparent and ever more important to make these linkages in order to understand the situation, to beat back the misinformation, and to develop a higher level of consciousness around this proliferating World War III scenario that the United States and its ruling elite and its collective West vassals are all leading us toward. So that's the one segment I want to do this afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I go, a few announcements. I probably will be back on stream, probably take the day off tomorrow. And then I will come back with a stream probably on Monday. Maybe I'll do a Monday, Tuesday, since I'll have the opportunity to do both days. I'll keep you posted on that. But with that said, everyone, that's when I'll be on next. Be on the lookout. I have a few writing projects I need to get to. I've been commissioned by the Global Times and CGTN. These are the places that will commission me. So be on the lookout for those articles. I am in the need of some new technology. All right. My computer crashed today. So if you are able to support this channel, do so in the links in the description. The best place is annual subscriptions on Patreon. You get a lot of perks, guest suggestions. You can ask questions for guests, as you saw today with Mr. McGovern. You can also get some Patreon exclusive audio as well of segments here. And then you can also go to Substack, hit up that newsletter, sign up for free. And then you can also give an annual subscription there if you prefer that. And you can do the same there. In the comments, you're able to suggest guests, ask questions of guests, etc. And you can also become a member. We do have a new member today, and I'm going to try to get to some of these super chats before I go. We do have a new member, so you can become a YouTube member, $5 a month, and you do get very similar perks to Patreon subscribers as well. But really, you get to join a great community, get shout outs during the streams, And yeah, so those are the best ways to support me. And there's one-time options also in the description of this video. With all that said, everyone, let me go through these super chats. It was a very lively chat today. Let's see if I can get to them. And then I will head out. So let's do this thing. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Also, I want to say that as you might be able to hear my outside blaring music, I do want to say that one of the most important things is to get on the Substack newsletter. YouTube notifications are becoming increasingly unreliable. I also have a Telegram in the pinned chat in the chat. The Telegram link is there as well. You want to follow me there. I'm starting to become more active on Telegram now as social media, as Twitter has become so stifling and repressive that I don't even care anymore that I haven't been taken down. I'm on my last strike there anyway. But I'm just going to continue to make a transition toward Telegram. And I want you all to follow me there. You can get notifications of all my streams there as well. And I focus mostly on geopolitics in China on that channel. So you can follow me there. That's a great place to get my work as well, to get notifications of these streams. So let me see if I can get to these super chats. Shout out the new member too, because I saw a new member. Hope you all are doing well. Tomorrow's actually my dad's birthday. For some of those you may know, he died in 2017. So I could stream tomorrow, but I actually will be taking that day off just for myself. Here we go. We got David Falconer. Thanks so much. Good morning from Hong Kong to you. Good morning from New York to you, David. Thanks so much. Hope Hong Kong is beautiful today. Here we go. Angels Flight. Sorry. New member. Thank you for becoming a YouTube member. $5 a month, everyone. You can become a member, a part of this great community supporting independent media. Let's see. I think there were some other super chats earlier in the stream. We have super sticker by Daniela. Thank you so much, Daniela, for that super sticker. Very much appreciated. Let's see. All right. Yeah, YouTube makes it so hit or miss for when streams. We had a great audience today. I had a lot of good friends share this out for me. So thanks so much, those good friends. Scott Ritter, Donbass Davushka. Love all of their work that they're doing on Ukraine. And they were kind enough to share this out. So that's how important it is, because YouTube does not like to hit up my subscribers always. So here we have Chung Ling Tong. Thank you so much for that super sticker. Appreciate it. All right. We're getting to the end here, I think. Yep, that was it, I think. All right. So that's it for the super chat, super stickers. All very much appreciated. All right. Of course, you can leave super thanks as well. So appreciate everything. Appreciate you all. Thanks so much for coming. We are I'm just checking out some of these comments from those who weren't able to give. I love the constructive criticism in the chat. That's always interesting. Thanks so thank you. Sometimes not so thank you when it doesn't feel constructive, but so this has been good. This has been good, everyone. I'm not going to keep myself on here any longer or keep you all here. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week, most likely. All right. And you will get notifications from me about when I go on live next. Also, make sure you're checking out the clips. Okay. Check out the clips that I post. Those are Sunday. Most days when I'm streaming, I don't post clips, but most days I'm not streaming, Sunday through Friday, you will find a clip on the channel if I'm not streaming. So be sure you're subscribed, hit that notifications bell. All right, everybody. This was great. Take good care. Have a good rest of your day, night, and be well. Bye-bye.